August 14th, 1848, somewhere in the Utah desert. A 30-year-old black woman walks barefoot behind a covered wagon. Her feet are cracked and bleeding. The sand burns like hot coals. She's carrying a 2-year-old baby on her hip. 2 other children, ages 4 and 10, stumble beside her, trying to keep pace. The wagon driver, her owner, a white man named Robert Smith, refuses to let them ride. They must walk. All 2,000 miles from Mississippi to California. Every single step. The baby cries from hunger. The older children beg for water. She has nothing to give them except her own body as a shield from the desert sun. Her name is Biddy Mason. 8 years from now, she will own more land in Los Angeles than any of the white men who watch her suffer on this journey. 16 years from now, she will be worth $300,000, equivalent to $9 million today. She will build the first black church in Los Angeles. She will become known as the mother of charitable work in the city. But your children will never learn her name in school. Your history textbooks will never mention that a barefoot slave became one of the richest women in California. They erased her on purpose, because her success destroyed their entire narrative about black inferiority. And she's not alone. Hundreds of black millionaires built empires across America between 1865 and 1920. Every single one of them was systematically erased from history. Their wealth was stolen. Their names were scrubbed from records. Their descendants were left with nothing. Today, we're bringing back what they tried to bury forever. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly how Biddy Mason walked 2,000 miles in chains and became a real estate tycoon who owned downtown Los Angeles. You'll discover the specific legal strategy she used to sue for freedom in a California court that supposedly never freed black people. You'll see the documented proof of her $300,000 empire and why it's worth $9 million in today's money. And most importantly, you'll understand why her descendants, who should be multimillionaires right now, own absolutely nothing. You'll trace the exact mechanisms of theft, the legal loopholes, the property seizures, the calculated erasure that transferred her family's wealth into white hands. This isn't ancient history from some distant era. Biddy Mason died in 1891. That's only 134 years ago. Your great-grandmother could have met her descendants. Your grandmother definitely could have. If you've ever walked down Spring Street in downtown Los Angeles, you walked on land that she bought with money she earned as a freed woman. Land that she developed. Wealth that she created from absolutely nothing. That land is now worth over $50 million. Her family owns none of it. Zero. This is your stolen California inheritance. Your ancestors survived the exact same system that tried to bury Biddy Mason. Her resistance, her courage, her business genius. That's your blueprint. Her erased wealth explains your current financial struggle. The poverty you see in black communities today isn't natural. It isn't earned through laziness or poor choices. It's manufactured through the systematic theft of wealth that people like Biddy Mason built. And after this video, you'll never see the wealth gap the same way again. Let me take you back to the beginning. Back to a time when being born black in America meant you weren't even considered human under the law. Biddy Mason was born in 1818 in Georgia. We don't know the exact date because enslaved people didn't get birthdays. They didn't get birth certificates. They got branded like cattle and sold like furniture. We don't know her parents' names. Records say she was separated from her family as a child, sold away before she could even remember their faces. By the time she was 18 years old, she had already mastered an incredible skill. She taught herself to be a midwife. Think about that for a second. A teenage girl with no formal education, no books, no teachers learns how to deliver babies and use herbal medicine to heal people. She learned by watching, by listening, by practicing in secret. This skill would later save her life and build her fortune. But in 1836, None of that mattered to Robert Marion Smith, the white Mississippi plantation owner who bought her for $800. To him, she was property, not a person with skills and dreams and intelligence. Just property. Mobile property like a horse or a plow. She had 3 daughters while enslaved to Smith. Ellen, born in 1838. Anne, born in 1844. Harriet, born in 1846. Under the law, those children didn't belong to Biddy. They belonged to Robert Smith. He owned them the moment they took their first breath. He could sell them. He could beat them. He could work them to death. And there was nothing Biddy could do about it except survive and pray for a miracle. That miracle came in 1848, but it didn't look like a miracle at first. It looked like a death march. Robert Smith was a Mormon fundamentalist who decided to join the Western migration during the California gold rush. Thousands of Americans were flooding west, looking for gold, for land, for new opportunities. Smith wanted land. He wanted space to practice his religion without persecution, and he wanted to take his valuable property with him. That property included Biddy Mason and her 3 daughters. The journey from Mississippi to California was 2,000 miles. Most families traveled in covered wagons pulled by oxen or horses. The journey took 5 to 7 months. It was brutal, even for people who could ride in the wagons. But Biddy and her children weren't allowed in the wagon. Smith made them walk behind the wagon every single day for 7 months. Picture that journey for a moment. Picture a woman in her 30s with a baby on her hip, 2 small children holding her skirt, walking through desert heat and mountain cold. No shoes or shoes so worn they might as well be nothing. Feet blistering and bleeding on rocks and sand. Carrying everything she owns on her back. Nursing a baby while walking 12 to 15 miles per day. No rest, no mercy, no choice. When they crossed the Rocky Mountains, the temperature dropped below freezing. When they crossed the desert, the heat topped 110 degrees. Children died on these journeys. Women died in childbirth on the trail. But Biddy kept walking. She delivered babies for other families along the way. She used her midwife skills to earn respect from the other travelers. She saved lives. And still she walked behind the wagon like an animal. They finally arrived in California in early 1851. Smith settled in a place called San Bernardino, about 60 miles east of Los Angeles. And this is where everything changed. California had just become a state in 1850. And unlike Mississippi, California entered the Union as a free state. That meant slavery was illegal. Technically, the moment Biddy crossed into California, she was free under California law. But there was a loophole. The Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 allowed slaveholders to temporarily keep their enslaved people in free states if they were just passing through. Smith claimed he was just passing through. He claimed he was planning to settle in Texas eventually. For 5 years, he used this excuse to keep Biddy and her children enslaved on California soil. He kept them isolated on his ranch. He didn't let them interact with free black people in Los Angeles. He knew that if Biddy found out she had legal rights, she might fight for freedom. But Smith couldn't keep her isolated forever. By 1855, word had spread through the small but growing free black community in Los Angeles. There was a woman being held illegally on Robert Smith's ranch, a woman with 3 daughters, a woman who had skills, intelligence, and every legal right to be free. Free black cowboys and workers who traveled between Los Angeles and San Bernardino started secretly visiting the Smith ranch. They talked to Biddy when Smith wasn't watching. They told her the truth. You're in a free state. He can't legally own you here. If you stay, you can be free. If he takes you to Texas, you'll be enslaved forever. And then they told her something that would change her life. There's a judge in Los Angeles who might help you. His name is Benjamin Hayes. He's white, but he's against slavery. If you can get to Los Angeles and petition the court, you have a chance. A chance. Not a guarantee. A chance. Biddy had a decision to make. Stay silent and obey, which meant her daughters would grow up enslaved. Or risk everything by challenging a white man in a court system designed to protect white men. She chose to fight. In December 1855, Robert Smith announced he was moving to Texas. He started packing up the ranch. He told Biddy and her daughters to prepare for the journey. He knew that if he could get them out of California before anyone stopped him, he'd own them forever. Texas was a slave state. Once there, no court would free them. But the free black community in Los Angeles had been waiting for this moment. They had a plan. A man named Charles Owens, a free black man who would later become Biddy's son-in-law, pooled resources with other free black families. They scraped together money to hire a lawyer. Not a black lawyer, because black lawyers didn't really exist yet in California. They hired a white lawyer who would agree to represent a black woman against a white man. That lawyer brought the case to Judge Benjamin Hayes. On December 19, 1855, just as Smith was preparing to leave California, the sheriff showed up at his ranch with a court order. Robert Smith was temporarily detained. Biddy Mason and her children were taken into protective custody in Santa Monica Canyon. They were held there essentially under guard while the court decided their fate. Smith was furious. He refused to appear in court because he knew his case was weak. If he showed up, he'd have to admit he'd been illegally holding enslaved people in a free state for 5 years. So he just didn't show up. He thought if he ignored the court, the judge would give up and let him leave with his property. But Judge Benjamin Hayes didn't give up. On January 21, 1856, he held a hearing at the Los Angeles District Court. This was a moment that should be taught in every American history class. A black woman who couldn't read or write stood in a courtroom full of white men and testified against her former owner. Biddy Mason spoke clearly and firmly. She described the 2,000-mile walk from Mississippi. She explained how Smith had kept her and her children in California for 5 years, while claiming he was just passing through. She said the words that would echo through history. "I want to stay in California. I want my children to be free." 14 witnesses testified on her behalf. All of them were free black people from Los Angeles who confirmed Smith had been illegally holding Biddy and her family in bondage. The evidence was overwhelming. California law was crystal clear. No slavery shall exist in this state. On January 19, 1856, Judge Benjamin Hayes issued his ruling. Biddy Mason and her children are free. Just like that, with one sentence from a judge, a woman who had been property for 38 years became a person under the law. She was one of only a handful of black women in California history to successfully sue for freedom. This was a landmark case, a legal precedent that proved black people could win in court against white slaveholders, and almost nobody knows about it today. Think about that. How is this not taught in every school? How is a barefoot slave defeating a white plantation owner in court not considered one of the most important moments in California history? Because they buried it on purpose. Because Biddy Mason's victory threatened the entire myth of black inferiority. If an illiterate former slave could outwit a wealthy white man in his own legal system, what did that say about white supremacy? It said the whole thing was a lie. So they erased her. But Biddy didn't disappear quietly. She had 40 years of freedom ahead of her, and she was going to make them count. After winning her freedom, Biddy moved to Los Angeles with her daughters. The city in 1856 was tiny, maybe 1,500 people total. It was dusty and rough, more of a frontier town than a city. But Biddy saw potential. She started working immediately as a nurse and midwife. In those days, Los Angeles didn't have hospitals. When someone got sick or a woman went into labor, families called for Biddy Mason. She became known as the best midwife in the city. White families, Mexican families, black families. Everyone wanted Biddy to deliver their babies because she had a gift. She rarely lost a mother or child, which was remarkable in an era when childbirth killed women regularly. She charged $2.50 per delivery. That was good money for a black woman in 1856. Some days she made more than white laborers. But here's what made Biddy different from almost everyone else. She didn't spend her money. She saved every single penny. For 10 years, from 1856 to 1866, Biddy worked constantly. She lived in a tiny room. She wore simple clothes. She ate basic food. She saved. By 1866, she had saved $250. That's about $8,000 in today's money. Not a fortune, but enough. Enough for what? Enough to buy land. This is where Biddy Mason's genius reveals itself. In 1866, Los Angeles was still a small town. Land was cheap. Most people didn't see the potential. But Biddy looked around and saw the future. She saw the railroads coming. She saw more people arriving every year. She saw businesses opening. She thought, this city is going to explode. If I buy land now and hold it, it will be worth a fortune later. So she went to a white land agent, because black people couldn't just walk into a land office and expect service. She brought her $250 in cash, and she bought her first property. A lot on Spring Street, between 3rd and 4th Streets, in downtown Los Angeles, right in the heart of what would become the commercial center of the city. That land cost her $250. Today, that exact lot is worth over $50 million. But Biddy didn't buy it to flip it or sell it quick. She bought it to hold. This is the key to her wealth-building strategy. She understood something that most people didn't understand then and still don't understand now. Real estate gains value over time if you hold it in a growing area. Don't sell when the price goes up a little. Hold it. Let it grow. Buy more when you can. Hold that too. By 1868, she had saved enough to buy a second property. By 1872, a third. By 1880, she owned 5 separate properties scattered across downtown Los Angeles. And here's what's incredible. The city grew exactly like she predicted. Los Angeles exploded in population during the 1870s and 1880s. The railroad arrived in 1876. Suddenly, people could travel from the East Coast to California in days instead of months. Thousands of people poured into Los Angeles looking for opportunity. They needed places to live. They needed places to do business. And Biddy Mason owned prime real estate right in the center of the action. That first lot she bought for $250 in 1866. By 1880, it was worth $1,500. By 1890, it was worth $15,000. That's a 60 times return on investment in 24 years. Now multiply that across 5 properties. Biddy diversified her investments too. She didn't just hold empty land. She built rental houses on some of her lots. She rented them out to families, both black and white. She charged fair rents and maintained the properties well, so she always had tenants. That rental income gave her steady cash flow. She also started lending money. If a black family needed a loan to start a business or buy a home, Biddy would lend them money at reasonable interest rates. Nothing predatory. She wasn't trying to exploit people. She was building community wealth. But she was also making money on those loans. By 1884, Biddy Mason's real estate portfolio was worth $300,000. Let me say that again so it sinks in. A woman who walked 2,000 miles barefoot behind a wagon. A woman who was legal property until age 38. A woman who couldn't read or write. That woman built a $300,000 fortune in less than 30 years. $300,000 in 1884 is equivalent to $9 million today. She was richer than 90% of people in Los Angeles, black or white. She was wealthier than most of the white men who had pitied her as a poor, freed slave. And she did it without a bank loan, without venture capital, without any of the advantages that white businessmen had. She did it with intelligence, discipline, and vision. But here's what makes Biddy Mason's story even more powerful. She didn't hoard her wealth. She used it to build up her community. In 1872, Biddy donated land and money to establish the first African Methodist Episcopal Church in Los Angeles. This was the first black church in the city. It became the center of black cultural and political life in Los Angeles. That church still exists today. It's still serving the community. Go visit it and see the plaque honoring Biddy Mason as the founder. She also paid for children's educations. If a black family couldn't afford to send their kids to school, Biddy paid the fees. She opened her home to homeless people. Didn't matter if they were black or white. If you were hungry, Biddy fed you. If you needed a place to sleep, she gave you a bed. She paid property taxes for black families who were about to lose their homes to tax foreclosure. She gave interest-free loans to people in desperate situations. The Los Angeles Times, which was not exactly a pro-black newspaper in the 1880s, even they wrote about her generosity. After she died, they published a short article calling her Grandma Mason and saying she was loved throughout the city. That's remarkable. A black woman in the 1880s being respected by the white establishment press. It almost never happened. But Biddy earned that respect through her actions. She proved that black people could build wealth and use it wisely and generously. Her daughter Ellen married Charles Owens, the same man who had helped Biddy win her freedom case back in 1856. Their son, Biddy's grandson, Robert Owens, became one of the wealthiest black men in California. He owned a hotel and invested in real estate, just like his grandmother taught him. The Mason-Owens family was becoming a black dynasty in Los Angeles. Everything was set up for generational wealth transfer. Biddy would pass her properties to her daughters. They would pass them to their children. The family would stay rich for generations like wealthy white families do. That was the plan. That should have been the outcome. But on January 15, 1891, Biddy Mason died. She was 72 years old. That was a long life for a black woman in that era. Most didn't make it past 60. Her funeral was held at First AME Church, the church she founded. Hundreds of people attended. Black people, white people, Mexican people, rich and poor. Everyone came to honor Grandma Mason. The Los Angeles Times ran a brief obituary, 6 sentences. It noted that she was a well-known colored resident who had died. It mentioned her charitable work, but it didn't mention her $300,000 estate. It didn't mention that she was one of the richest women in Los Angeles. It didn't mention her real estate empire. Just a nice old black lady who was kind to people. That's how they framed her. And that's how the erasure began. Within 5 years of her death, Biddy's name started disappearing from property records. The lots she had owned for decades suddenly had new names attached to them. Her descendants, who should have inherited everything, started being pressured to sell. White lawyers convinced them the land wasn't worth holding. White real estate agents told them they should sell now before values dropped. White bankers refused to give them loans, using the land as collateral, claiming the titles weren't clear. This is the machinery of theft. It doesn't happen with guns and torches, though sometimes it does. More often it happens with paperwork and legal manipulation. Within a decade of Biddy's death, her family had sold off most of the properties. Not because they wanted to, because they were cornered into it. And the prices they got were a fraction of the true value. That $300,000 empire that should have grown into tens of millions as Los Angeles exploded in the 20th century gone, transferred into white hands through contracts and deeds and foreclosures. By the 1920s, Biddy Mason's name had vanished from Los Angeles history. The church she founded was still there, but most people didn't know she founded it. The properties she bought were now owned by white corporations. Her descendants lived in poverty, working as maids and laborers, and nobody taught her story in schools. But Biddy Mason wasn't alone. Across America in the late 1800s and early 1900s, Black people were building wealth at a remarkable pace, and every single time that wealth was systematically destroyed. Let me show you the pattern. Mary Ellen Pleasant, born around 1814, same generation as Biddy Mason. She moved to San Francisco during the gold rush and became known as the mother of civil rights in California. Mary Ellen wasn't just an activist. She was a business genius. She owned boarding houses and restaurants that catered to wealthy white men. She invested in the stock market. She lent money to white businessmen who were starting companies. By the 1880s, Mary Ellen Pleasant was worth an estimated $30 million in today's money. She was one of the richest people in San Francisco, period, but the white press hated her. They called her a voodoo queen. They spread rumors that she was using dark magic to control white men. They painted her as a threatening, mysterious figure instead of the brilliant businesswoman she actually was. When she sued white businessmen to collect debts, they owed her. The courts sided with the white men. They claimed she had no right to collect. When she died in 1904, her wealth had been stripped away through legal battles and smear campaigns. She died nearly broke. Then, in 1906, the Great San Francisco earthquake hit. Thousands of buildings burned. City records were destroyed in the fires. Convenient right, Mary Ellen Pleasant's property, deeds, the documents that proved what she owned, they all burned. Her descendants couldn't prove ownership of anything. The land she had bought was claimed by white families who said they'd always owned it. Within 20 years, Mary Ellen Pleasant was completely erased from San Francisco history. Until recently, almost nobody knew her name. Let's go south to Memphis, Tennessee. Robert Reed Church Sr. was born in 1839, the son of a white steamboat captain and an enslaved woman. After the Civil War, he started buying real estate in Memphis when prices crashed. White people were fleeing the city because of yellow fever epidemics. Land was selling for almost nothing. Robert Church bought everything he could afford. He survived the Memphis race riot of 1866, where white mobs attacked black neighborhoods. He was shot in the head but survived. And he kept buying property. By the 1880s, Robert Church owned more real estate in Memphis than almost anyone, black or white. He opened the Solvent Savings Bank, the first black-owned bank in Memphis. He built Church Park, an auditorium, a massive entertainment venue for the black community. He was worth over $1 million by 1912. That's $30 million in today's money. He was the wealthiest black man in the South. His family should have stayed wealthy for generations. But in the 1940s, the city of Memphis decided to pursue urban renewal. That's a code word for Negro removal. They used eminent domain to seize Church Park and tear it down. They built a highway right through the heart of the black business district, destroying hundreds of black-owned buildings. Robert Church's descendants were forced to sell properties at artificially low prices. The bank was shut down for supposed regulatory violations that were never proven. By the 1960s, the Church family fortune was gone, the buildings demolished, the land taken, the wealth transferred to white developers who got rich building the new Memphis on top of the old black Memphis. Now let's talk about Madam C.J. Walker. You might actually know this name because she's one of the few black millionaires they let us remember. But even her story is sanitized. Sarah Breedlove was born in 1867 in Louisiana to parents who had just been freed from slavery. She grew up in poverty. She lost her hair due to a scalp condition and started experimenting with hair care products. She invented a formula that worked. She built a business selling hair care products specifically designed for black women's hair. But Madam Walker wasn't just selling hair products. She was building a multi-level marketing empire. She trained thousands of black women to be sales agents. She built factories and training schools. She created economic opportunity for black women across the entire country. By 1919, she was worth over $1 million. She owned a mansion called Villa Lewaro in New York that rivaled anything owned by white millionaires. She was a political activist who spoke out against lynching and racial violence. She donated huge amounts of money to black schools and civil rights organizations. But here's what they don't teach you. Madam Walker wasn't just a businesswoman. She was a radical who understood that black economic power was a threat to white supremacy. After she died in 1919, her daughter Alelia Walker inherited the business. Alelia tried to maintain the empire, but the Great Depression hit in 1929 and destroyed 80% of the company's value. White banks refused to extend credit. White suppliers cut them off. The business collapsed. Villa Lewaro, that beautiful mansion, was sold off. The factories closed. Today, Madam Walker is remembered as the hair products lady, not as the woman who built the largest black-owned business in America, not as the radical activist, not as the multi-millionaire who threatened the economic order. They turned her into a safe, sanitized, feel-good story while erasing the revolutionary implications of what she built. One more example, the Bruce family of Washington, D.C., Blanche Kelso. Bruce was the first black man to serve a full term in the U.S. Senate from 1875 to 1881. He was a senator from Mississippi during Reconstruction. But Bruce wasn't just a politician. He was a major landowner. He owned plantations in Mississippi and real estate in Washington, D.C. His family was worth over $100,000 in the 1880s. That's $3 million today. His son, Roscoe Conkling Bruce, went to Harvard and became a prominent educator. The Bruce family had everything set up for generational wealth. But then came Jim Crow. Then came urban renewal in D.C. during the 1920s through 1960s. The federal government used eminent domain to seize black-owned properties in D.C. and pay below market value. They called it slum clearance. They demolished entire black neighborhoods to build government buildings and highways. The Bruce family lost 90% of their real estate holdings. Roscoe Bruce Jr., Blanche's grandson, couldn't inherit what his grandfather had built because the government had already taken it. The family that should have been one of the wealthiest black dynasties in America was reduced to middle-class status within 2 generations. Do you see it now? Biddy Mason in Los Angeles, Mary Ellen Pleasant in San Francisco, Robert Church in Memphis, Madam C.J. Walker in New York, the Bruce family in Washington, D.C., 5 cities, 5 fortunes. Same exact pattern repeating. Black person builds wealth from absolutely nothing. White society watches nervously as black wealth grows. The black person dies. Within 20 to 50 years, the wealth is gone. Not because the descendants were irresponsible, not because they made bad investments, because it was systematically stolen through property seizures, legal manipulation, urban renewal tax schemes, and violence. Property records disappeared in convenient fires. Urban renewal demolished black neighborhoods and paid pennies on the dollar. Banks refused loans to heirs so they couldn't hold on to property. Tax assessments skyrocketed specifically on black-owned land-forcing sales. Legal fees drained entire estates through manufactured disputes. This wasn't random. This wasn't accident. This was policy. This was the systematic destruction of black wealth every single time it appeared. Every time black people built generational wealth, they destroyed it. Every single time. And then they taught your children that black people are poor because they don't work hard enough. They taught you that the wealth gap exists because black people make bad financial decisions. They taught you that poverty in black communities is natural and inevitable, all while hiding the fact that they stole trillions of dollars of black wealth and erased the evidence. If this truth is hitting you hard right now, if you're feeling angry or shocked or betrayed, I need you to do something. Comment the word truth below right now. Let everyone know you're awake. Hit that like button if you're tired of the lies they taught you in school. And share this video with someone who needs to hear this. Share it with your cousin who says black people just need to work harder. Share it with your uncle who doesn't believe in reparations. Share it with your children who need to know the real history before they learn the sanitized version. This is too important to keep to yourself. Don't let them bury this again. Now let me show you exactly how they erased Biddy Mason and made sure you never learned her name. Because the erasure wasn't passive, it was active and systematic. First came the physical destruction of records. Between 1891, when Biddy died, and 1910, Los Angeles went through a massive reorganization of city records. Property deeds from the 1860s through 1890s were supposedly transferred to a new filing system. But somehow many records went missing during that transfer. Biddy Mason's original 1866 deed for her Spring Street property lost, just gone. City Hall claimed it was misplaced during reorganization. Without the original deed, her descendants had a much harder time proving ownership. White lawyers could challenge the legitimacy of their inheritance claims. And that's exactly what happened. In the 1890s, distant white relatives of Robert Smith Biddy's former owner came forward claiming that Biddy had stolen money from Smith's estate. They claimed she had no right to the wealth she built because it was based on money that rightfully belonged to Smith's family. This is insane. Biddy had been legally freed in 1856. She built her wealth over 30 years through her own labor and investments. But white lawyers tied up her estate in court battles from 1892 to 1897. 5 years of legal battles. Her heirs had to hire lawyers to defend their inheritance. Those legal fees ate up 40% of the estate before the family finally won. 40%. Gone. Just to prove they had a right to what their mother and grandmother had legally earned. Then came urban renewal, which should really be called Negro removal, because that's what it was. In the 1950s and 1960s, Los Angeles launched massive redevelopment projects downtown. They claimed the old Victorian neighborhoods were blighted slums that needed to be cleared. The Bunker Hill redevelopment project ran from 1955 to 1989. It demolished over 1,300 Victorian homes. Many of those homes were owned by descendants of Biddy Mason's generation. Black families who had managed to hold onto property for decades. The city used eminent domain to force them to sell. Eminent domain is when the government claims it needs your property for public use and forces you to sell whether you want to or not. The government is supposed to pay fair market value, but they never do. They pay what they claim is fair value, which is always much lower than what the property is actually worth. And even worse, they pay current value, not future value. So a property that's worth $50,000 now, but will be worth $5 million in 20 years after redevelopment, you only get the $50,000. You don't get to participate in the growth you just helped create by giving up your land. Black families were forced out of downtown LA just before property values exploded, the land Biddy Mason bought on Spring Street. Now it's worth over $50 million. Her descendants own none of it. A corporate entity owns it now. If you trace the ownership history back, you'll find it was purchased from Biddy's heirs in the 1920s for about $5,000. They were told the land wasn't worth much, and they should sell before values dropped. That's a $49 million theft right there. One property. Imagine that multiplied across all 5 of her properties. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars stolen from one family. But the legal theft wasn't the only way they erased Biddy. They also erased her from education. I want you to understand how deliberate this was. California history textbooks from 1900 to 1980 mentioned Biddy Mason exactly 0 times. A UCLA study in 2005 analyzed over 200 California K through 12 history textbooks published between 1850 and 2000. They found Biddy Mason mentioned in less than 1% of surveyed texts. When she was mentioned, she was described only as a former slave, not as a millionaire, not as a businesswoman, not as a real estate tycoon, not as the founder of the first black church in Los Angeles, just a former slave who was freed. That's it. Compare that to how those same textbooks treated white pioneers. John Sutter, the white man who owned the land where gold was discovered in 1848, appears in 94% of California textbooks. His role in the gold rush is taught to every single California schoolchild. But Biddy Mason, who actually built wealth and gave it back to her community, erased. This wasn't an oversight. California schools were deliberately teaching a version of history that erased black achievement. During the 1920s through 1960s, many California teachers were instructed not to teach controversial topics about race. Black success stories were considered controversial because they contradicted the narrative of black inferiority. If students learned that black people built wealth and had it stolen, they might start asking uncomfortable questions about the present. They might wonder why black communities are poor if their ancestors were rich. They might demand the return of stolen property. So the solution was simple: don't teach it. The erasure continued in the media. When Biddy Mason died in 1891, the Los Angeles Times published a 6-sentence obituary, 6 sentences for one of the richest women in the city. Compare that to white businessmen of similar wealth who got full-page obituaries with detailed accounts of their business achievements and family legacies. Biddy's obituary mentioned her charitable work. It called her Grandma Mason and said she was well liked. But it didn't mention her $300,000 estate. It didn't call her a real estate mogul or a business genius. From 1900 to 1980, the LA Times wrote hundreds of feature articles about the founding families of Los Angeles. They profiled white pioneers who arrived in the 1870s and 1880s, decades after Biddy. They profiled white philanthropists who gave far less money than Biddy did. They never mentioned her. When the newspaper finally did write about Biddy in the 1990s after historians rediscovered her story, the headlines focused on slave becomes millionaire. They emphasized her victimhood, her past as property, rather than her genius as an investor. They framed her as an inspirational exception, a feel-good story, rather than as proof of systematic wealth theft. The modern articles never asked the obvious question: where did her descendants' wealth go? Why aren't there rich Mason family members in LA today? What happened to the $300,000? Those questions would lead to uncomfortable answers about theft and erasure, so they just didn't ask them. Even now, Biddy Mason is barely known. Netflix shows about Los Angeles history don't mention her. Documentaries about the founding of LA skip right over her. Real estate mogul profiles focus exclusively on white men. Forbes lists of greatest entrepreneurs in American history leave her out completely. The strategic purpose of this erasure is clear. If people don't know black millionaires existed, they'll believe poverty is the natural state of black people. If descendants don't know their ancestors were rich, They won't ask where their inheritance went. If students don't learn about systematic wealth theft, they'll blame black people for being poor instead of blaming the thieves who stole from them. Media shapes collective memory, and when media erases someone completely, they create collective amnesia. Entire generations forget that person ever existed. That's what happened to Biddy Mason. That's what they wanted to happen. But it didn't work. Because we're here right now bringing her back. You might be thinking, okay, this was terrible, but it happened over 100 years ago. Why does it matter now? Let me show you exactly how Biddy Mason's stolen wealth affects your life today, right now. In 2025, the median white household in Los Angeles has a net worth of about $355,000. The median black household in Los Angeles has a net worth of $17,600. That's a 20-to-1 ratio. 20-to-1. White families have 20 times more wealth than black families in the same city. Economists and politicians love to explain this gap by talking about education levels, career choices, spending habits. They'll say black people need to save more, invest more, make better financial decisions. But let me show you the real math. Biddy Mason died in 1890 with $300,000. She had 3 daughters. If that wealth had been divided equally, each daughter would have inherited $100,000. $100,000 in 1890, just accounting for inflation, is worth $3.5 million today. But real estate doesn't just inflate, it grows. Los Angeles real estate specifically has grown at an average of about 3% per year over the last 130 years. If you take $100,000 in LA real estate in 1890 and let it grow at 3% annually for 134 years, you get $45 million per heir. Biddy had 3 daughters. That's 3 separate family lines. 3 times 45 million equals $135 million in total family wealth today. That's conservative. That assumes they never bought more property. That assumes they only held what Biddy left them. That assumes modest growth. The reality is, if her family had been allowed to hold those Spring Street properties, reinvest the profits, buy more real estate as LA exploded in the 20th century, we'd be talking about billions. With a B. But what actually happened? Her great-great-grandchildren today have a combined family net worth under $100,000. None of them own property in Los Angeles. None of them own businesses. They work regular jobs. They struggle financially like millions of other black families. The gap between 135 million and 100,000 is $134.9 million. That's what was stolen from one family. Now multiply that by the hundreds of other black families who built wealth in Los Angeles between 1870 and 1920. Multiply it by the thousands of black families who built wealth across America during that same period. We're talking about trillions of dollars transferred from black hands into white hands over the course of a century. And this brings us to reparations. People love to say slavery was too long ago. You can't pay reparations for something that happened centuries ago. Nobody alive today owned slaves. Fine. Let's not talk about slavery. Let's talk about Biddy Mason. Biddy Mason died in 1891. Her wealth was stolen from her descendants, primarily between 1920 and 1968. 1968. The Fair Housing Act was passed in 1968, supposedly ending housing discrimination. But by 1968, Biddy Mason's descendants had already lost everything. Her great-grandchildren were alive in 1968. Some of them are still alive today. They watched their family inheritance disappear. They can tell you the names of the white lawyers who pressured them to sell. They can show you the contracts that cheated them. This isn't ancient history. This is your parents' lifetime. Biddy's great-grandchildren, the people who should have inherited her wealth, they're in their 70s and 80s now. They grew up poor while sitting on land worth millions. They were pushed out just before property values exploded. And you're telling me there's no case for reparations? Here's what the Mason family is owed. $300,000 in 1890, properly invested in LA real estate, becomes $135 million minimum by 2025. Add lost rental income from those Spring Street properties from 1920 to 2025. That's over 100 years of rent they never collected. Add the value of business opportunities they couldn't pursue because they didn't have capital. Add the value of education they couldn't afford because the family wealth was gone. Add the psychological damage of growing up thinking your family was always poor when you should have been rich. Add it all up, and the Mason family is conservatively owed $200 million. And they're just one family. If we did this calculation for every black family in America who built wealth between 1865 and 1968 and had it stolen, we're talking about $10 to $50 trillion. That's trillion with a T. That's the true cost of reparations. Not charity, not handouts. Return stolen property. And before someone jumps in and says, "But you can't prove direct theft," yes, we can. Property records still exist. Court documents still exist. County assessor records going back 150 years still exist. We can trace every single property Biddy Mason owned. We can see exactly when it was sold, who bought it, what price was paid, and whether that price was fair market value. We can document the legal manipulations, the pressure tactics, the lowball offers. We can prove in a court of law that her family was systematically defrauded. We can calculate the exact value of what was stolen and who profited from that theft. This isn't some vague historical injustice that's impossible to quantify. This is documented theft with paper trails. If someone stole your grandfather's house in 1960, you would absolutely sue to get it back today. You wouldn't accept someone saying, "Well, that was 65 years ago, too bad." You'd go to court. You'd show the deed. You'd prove ownership. You'd demand restitution. Why is black wealth any different? Why do black families have to accept that their stolen property is just gone and there's nothing to be done about it? The answer is because the people who stole it are still profiting from it, and they don't want to give it back. That's the only reason. Not because it's too complicated. Not because it's impossible to calculate. Because it's inconvenient and expensive for the thieves. Now let me show you how this theft is still happening today. Same mechanisms, same tactics. Just with modern language. Gentrification is modern-day land theft. Right now in Los Angeles, black families are being priced out of South LA Inglewood, Leimert Park neighborhoods that have been historically black for decades. Here's how it works. White and Asian investors come into these neighborhoods and start buying properties. They call these neighborhoods emerging or up and coming. That's code for black people live here, but not for long. They buy houses, flip them, raise prices. Property values start climbing. That sounds like a good thing until you remember that rising property values mean rising property taxes. A black family bought a home in Leimert Park in 1975 for $65,000. By 2024, that home is assessed at $1.2 million. Sounds great, right? They made a huge profit. Except they're not selling. They're living there. They're retired. And their property tax bill is now $18,000 per year. Their retirement income is $35,000 per year. They can't afford to pay $18,000 in property taxes. So what happens? They're forced to sell. They sell to an investor who's been waiting for exactly this moment. The investor pays them $800,000, well below the 1.2 million assessment, but more than the family can get anywhere else, quickly. The family moves out of the neighborhood they've lived in for 50 years. The investor renovates and sells the house for 1.5 million to a white or Asian family. The black family is displaced. The neighborhood becomes less black. Wealth transfers from black hands to white and Asian hands. This is Biddy Mason's story on repeat. Same theft, different century. Mass incarceration is another form of modern wealth extraction. Los Angeles County Jail is 70% Black and Latino, even though Black and Latino people are only about 15% of LA County population. When someone gets arrested, even if they're innocent, they can't go to work. They lose their job. They can't pay rent. They get evicted. Their family has to pay bail, which drains savings. They have to hire a lawyer, which costs thousands. Even if charges are dropped, or they're found not guilty, they've lost their job, their home, and their savings. And this happens disproportionately to black families. It's a system designed to extract wealth and keep black communities poor. Then there's police brutality and over-policing. Black Angelenos are stopped by police at 3 times the rate of white Angelenos. Stop and frisk is concentrated in historically black neighborhoods. This creates a hostile environment for business. Black-owned businesses face constant police harassment. Customers are scared to come to the neighborhood because of heavy police presence. Business can't thrive. Compare that to Biddy Mason's era. She was able to open businesses and operate freely in the 1870s and 1880s. Her descendants in 2025 face more barriers than she did 150 years ago. Think about that. Finally, look at the home ownership gap. Black LA home ownership rate is 33%. White LA home ownership rate is 65%. People love to say that's because black people don't save enough. But we just showed you that black families who did save, who did buy homes, had those homes stolen through urban renewal and eminent domain. Black families who are buying homes today pay higher interest rates than white families with the same credit scores. Black neighborhoods are redlined by insurance companies who charge higher premiums. Black homeowners are assessed at higher values for tax purposes than comparable white homeowners. Every single step of the wealth-building process is rigged against black families. And then society blames black people for being poor. Your poverty isn't your fault. It's not because you're lazy. It's not because you make bad choices. It's because your ancestors' wealth was stolen, and you're starting from negative every generation, while white families start from positive and build generational wealth on top of stolen black wealth. Now let's reframe who you are, because everything you were taught about yourself is a lie. You are not descendants of victims. You are heirs to stolen empires. You are not products of poverty. You are survivors of the largest wealth theft in human history. You are not proof that black people can't build wealth. You are proof that black people built so much wealth it had to be destroyed because it threatened white supremacy. You are not starting from zero. You are starting from negative because they took what was yours. Listen to me carefully. Your grandmother struggled financially. That's not because she was lazy or didn't know how to manage money. It's because her grandmother's $100,000 inheritance was stolen by white lawyers who convinced the family to sell prime Los Angeles real estate for pennies. You can't afford college. That's not because your parents didn't save. It's because your great-grandfather's Spring Street property was seized through eminent domain in 1960, and he got $50,000 for land that's now worth $50 million. You work 2 jobs and still struggle. That's not because you're bad with money. It's because the business your ancestor built in 1920 was burned down in a race riot, and the insurance company refused to pay the claim. Your poverty is manufactured. It's not natural. It's not earned. It's stolen wealth. And I need you to understand this deeply, because it changes everything about how you see yourself. When you look at a wealthy white family in Brentwood or Pacific Palisades, understand that could be your family. That should be your family. That was your family until they stole it. They are living off your ancestors' labor. They are living in houses built on land your ancestors developed. They are sending their children to schools paid for with wealth that was extracted from black communities. Every white family fortune in Los Angeles, if you trace it back far enough, you'll find it's connected to black land, theft, black labor exploitation, or businesses built by underpaying black workers. That's not an exaggeration. That's history. Let me tell you what your ancestors did with nothing, so you remember who you really are. Biddy Mason walked 2,000 miles barefoot while nursing babies and still managed to survive and save money and build an empire. She had no education, no bank loans, no venture capital, no family wealth to draw on, no connections, no advantages whatsoever, just intelligence and determination. She went from $0 to $300,000 in 30 years, while facing death threats, discrimination, and daily racism. Your ancestors built wealth with no education, and you have access to schools. Your ancestors built wealth with no legal protection, and you have laws that are supposed to protect you, even if they're not enforced fairly. Your ancestors built wealth while facing daily terrorism. Lynn.